Welcome, 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 everyone. So good to see you. This evening, we continue commemorating the centenary of the Ascension of Abdu'l-Bahá with the 6th PG Town Hall meeting. We have a wonderful program of stories, prayers, and songs, and we welcome you to share yours with us as well. Last November, the world commemorated the 100th anniversary of the passing of Abdu'l-Bahá. The Universal House of Justice gave us his newly translated prayers, initiated construction of his shrine, called special gatherings in the Holy Land, and produced films describing his person and the Baha'i community's century of endeavor since his passing. Our team has identified local efforts that can give this anniversary lasting impact. Each of us can make a personal commitment to learn more about Abdu'l-Bahá. We can practice telling favorite stories about him and then share them with friends. We can incorporate stories and writings of Abdu'l-Bahá into our core activities. We can invite friends to town hall style gatherings where participants share writings and life stories of Abdu'l-Bahá. Tonight, we will open with a prepared program of stories and writings starting in 1903 when the persecution of the Bahá'ís in Iran increased, the worst since 1852, and ending with Abdu'l-Bahā's first visit to France in 1911. All of you are then invited to share stories and quotes. They can be from other years and other authors, but should help us better understand Abdu'l-Bahá. We hope you enjoy the program.
He is God, O thou kind and beloved Lord. These friends are exhilarated with the wine of the covenant and are wanderers in the wilderness of thy love. Their hearts are consumed by the flames of remoteness from thee, and they yearn eagerly for the revelation of thy splendors. From thine invisible kingdom, the realm of the unseen, reveal unto them the effulgent glory of thy grace, and shed upon them the radiance of thy bounty. At every moment send forth a new blessing, and reveal a fresh favor. O divine providence, we are weak, and thou art the most powerful. We are as tiny ants, and thou art the King of the realm of glory. Bestow thy grace and confer thy bounty upon us, that we may kindle a flame and shed its splendor abroad, that we may show forth strength and render some service. Grant that we may bring illumination to this darksome earth and spirituality to this fleeting world of dust. Suffer us not to rest for a moment, nor to defile ourselves with the transitory things of this life. Enable us to prepare a banquet of guidance. Inscribe with our life blood the verses of love. Leave fear and peril behind. Become even as fruitful trees, and cause human perfections to appear in this ephemeral world. Thou, in truth, art the all-bountiful, the most compassionate, the ever-forgiving, the pardoner. Abdu'l-Bahá.
To begin the program, we will first look at what was happening in the U.S. in the years 1901 to 1911, especially relating to people of African heritage. And then we will move to the story of Abdu'l-Bahá in the Ottoman Empire. Some background. In 1896, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a major decision, provided the legal basis for explicit segregation in American society, the provision of separate facilities and services to Blacks and whites, as long as facilities and services were equal. Through the early 1900s, many new laws known as Jim Crow laws were passed in southern states, creating legally segregated schools, transportation systems, and lodging. The requirement of equality was not generally enforced, however. The best known examples of separate and unequal facilities in the South was the system of public education. Resources went to white schools, raising teacher salaries and per pupil funding while reducing class size. Black schools experienced no real improvements of this type. The result was a sharp decline in the relative quality of schooling available to African American children. Events on a timeline. 1901, the last African American congressman leaves office. After the Civil War, elections allowed African Americans to be elected to Congress. Then it changed, and 1901 was the last for 28 years. 1903, W.E.B. Du Bois publishes one of his books, The Souls of Black Folk, which rejected the gradualism of Booker T. Washington and called for agitation on behalf of African American rights. Booker T. Washington was Southerner, African American, who felt that education was the first step. W.B. Du Bois was a Northerner, African American, who felt that it was time for equal rights right away. 1904, Mary McLeod Bethune founds the college in Daytona Beach, Florida, known today as Bethune-Cookman College. She was, at the time, the most famous African American in the United States, I believe. 1905, African American intellectuals and activists led by W.E.B. Du Bois and William Monroe Trotter, who was an African American Harvard graduate, began the Niagara movement, calling for civil and political rights for African Americans. 1909, the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, forms to promote the use of courts to restore the legal rights of Black Americans. 1910, Baltimore City Council approves in the United States the first city ordinance designating the boundaries of Black and white neighborhoods, which was declared unconstitutional 7 years later. 1911, the National Urban League formed to help African Americans secure equal employment. A lot of organizations beginning. In the South, sustained campaign of lynching targeting African Americans, public execution by a mob in order to intimidate, in the form of hanging usually, extreme form of social control. The red column in the middle shows by year the number of known lynchings of Black Americans. Clearly the number was greater, really.
Meanwhile, in the Ottoman Empire, the empire continued to decline because there were a great deal of pressures from the diverse populations that had difficulty having their needs met. So they were always being attracted by external powers, other nations seeking pieces of land, as had been done in the past, by instigating or supporting separatist activities. So this was always a concern for the Ottoman Emperor Abdul-Hamid II, who had become more and more authoritarian. There was a period, as you remember, called the First Constitutional Era. It was the first time that they had a go at having a constitutional government. But after some time, he stopped that practice and gained power back in his own hand. This really concerned a special group of people that was gaining power, that had gotten notoriety during that first constitutional era, because they were the young Ottomans, people who had been mostly educated in the West, who had acquired an appreciation for European and Western thoughts or ideas that were popular or becoming more popular in the West, such as equality, justice, the ability to participate in governance, participation like parliament. This group, referred to by the Westerners as the young Ottomans or the young Turks, there were many different factions with different ideologies within the same group of people. One faction that had military forces among them advanced on Constantinople, and as a result, the emperor accepted for a time to have a constitution. This was the second time the empire had a constitution and the people were more protected. The rise of the strength of the Ottoman Turks agitated people who were very concerned about the secular nature of the rising Ottoman Turks. So they did a counter-revolution and they forced the emperor to reinstitute the Sharia law, the Islamic law of the land. That concerned the young Turks, and eventually they were able to have him deposed. And his younger half-brother, Mehmed V, came to power at the age of 64. In a previous town hall, we mentioned that Abdu'l-Bahá said the Sultan is going into prison and Abdu'l-Bahá is coming out of prison, something to that effect. This period of change and transformation is really a defining moment in a very fluid history in this region. By the time that 1911 came around, Turkey, as we know now, had reduced in size to that yellow area you see in the map, along with the salmon-colored area to the right of it and below it. It still had Iraq and Lebanon in those areas, but it had completely lost all of its influence and control over North Africa to Italy. During this period, Abdu'l-Bahá was guiding many people in society. He was sharing the teachings of Baha'u'llah, and he was explaining that while the young Turks believe in equality and participation or consultation and these similar teachings, they are really interested in Turkey's interests or the Ottoman interests. But Baha'u'llah is interested in all of humanity's interests.
While things are going on in the Ottoman Empire and Abdu'l-Bahá and Baha'u'llah were trying to look at the welfare of the world, extreme violence began in the motherland, the birthplace of the Baha'i faith, in 1903 against the Baha'is in Iran. In the 1890s, Persia was experiencing the stress of contact with the great powers of the West and the new ideas that Westerners had brought with them. And so there was considerable resentment against the foreign powers trying to exploit the natural resources of the country, in particular the French, British, and Russian. And in addition to the nationalist feelings, a movement for constitutional reform began. This reform movement in turn called to being a strong reaction from groups such as the clergy, whose power was threatened by the very idea of change. So everyone was afraid of change, and there was a lot of it. In this turbulent atmosphere, the Baha'is were a most convenient scapegoat against which both sides could vent their fears. As the movement for reform grew in strength, the reactionaries increasingly accused the Baha'is of fomenting and supporting the nationalist and constitutional movements. Economic stress added to the difficulties encountered by the Baha'is. Prices of basic commodities rose rapidly. These price rises were keenly resented by the poorer sections of society. The conservative leaders played on the hardships, fears, and prejudices of the uneducated masses for their own ends. In the north of the country, political agitation against the repressive rule of Aminu Sultan, the prime minister, and the hardships endured by the ordinary people found expression in sporadic attacks on foreigners, Jews, and Zoroastrians. Disturbances began in Tabriz and spread to a number of towns. In the south, the discontent was stronger and was expressed in direct attacks on the Baha'is. Here we have a picture of Sheikh Mohammed Taqi, the son of the wolf. In early May of 1903, disturbances broke out in Rash. But the courage and prompt action of the governor general of the province prevented them from spreading further. Disturbances began in Isfahan in the same month, instigated by the leading cleric of the city, Sheikh Mohammed Taqi. The sheikh was addressed by Baha'u'llah in his last major work as the son of the wolf on account of the ferocity with which he had attacked the believers. Now a highly respected Baha'i citizen, aged 80 years old, was brutally murdered. Sheikh Mohammed Taqi wrote to the leading clerics in the major cities of Persia, urging them to follow his example. This letter found fertile ground in Yazd. There, a newly appointed imam, Jumi, prayer leader, anxious to consolidate his authority and demonstrate his religious zeal, preached a sermon against the Baha'is, just one day after his arrival in Yazd. The same day, the 13th of June, a rabble went on the rampage, attacking and looting Baha'i homes. So violent was the mob that the governor of the city could do nothing to protect the Baha'is, and on June 15th, the first martyrdom occurred. The next week saw outbreaks of violence in the villages around Yazd. In the city itself, the riot lasted for 2 weeks. It was the worst disturbance ever seen in Yazd. On June 28, the clergy of the city declared it to be lawful to seize the goods of the Baha'is. Can you imagine what happened to us these days? Wow. Women and children were appallingly mistreated and left to die of starvation. The governor only managed to appease the mob by ordering that one well-known believer be blown from the mouth of a cannon and the throat of another be slit. News of the riot was reported in newspapers around the world. The London Times reported that 120 Baha'is had died in Yazd. Certainly, the Baha'is had not experienced such persecution since the terrible summer of 1852. Disturbances followed in Kashan, Hamadan, and Malayir. Abdu'l-Bahā's agony on hearing of these events was intense. For 2 weeks, he was so overwhelmed with grief that he hardly slept at all. While the persecution raged on, he sent urgently to Aka Mirza Aka, a nephew of the wife of the Bab, who was living in Shiraz, requesting him to restore the house of the Bab. This house had undergone alterations since the 1840s, and there were very few believers other than Aga Mirza Aga who could recall what it had looked like when the Bab was living there. Aga Mirza Aga sent to Abdu'l-Bahá a plan showing every detail of the house as it had been in the Bab's lifetime. His plan was approved, and under his close supervision, despite numerous difficulties and considerable danger, the work was done. Soon after the restoration was complete, Aga Mirza Aga passed away. At the very same time, Abdu'l-Bahá wrote to the Bahá'ís of the United States in answer to their petition to construct their own house of worship in North America. He encouraged them to consult together and challenge the North American believers to achieve deeds that would bring comfort and joy to the hearts of their sorely, severely oppressed fellow believers in Persia.
In the Holy Land, Mirza Muhammad Ali and his supporters were still working to halt the building work on Mount Carmel. They made many attempts to blacken the name of Abdu'l-Bahá. They had contacted various officials and were seeking to influence the Sultan's chief minister, Sheikh Abdul-Huda. Ayubay, the chief of police in Akka, had been influenced by the covenant breakers, and secret agents were sent by him to Constantinople carrying false reports. Some of the believers now urged Abdu'l-Bahá to present his own case to the Ottoman authorities and explain the harm being done by the covenant breakers. This Abdu'l-Bahá refused to do, and that picture is an early picture of the Shrine of the Bab. Meanwhile, in the West, Baha'is in Paris were collecting money to send envoys to secure Abdu'l-Bahā's release. But Abdu'l-Bahá told them not to follow through on this plan. But news of it reached the covenant breakers, and they used that to further their efforts to besmirch Abdu'l-Bahá. They said that Abdu'l-Bahá stopped the plan only because he disliked the Wali, the governor, and angered him towards Abdu'l-Bahá. As a direct result of these intrigues, the governor of Akka, who had shown such respect for Abdu'l-Bahá, was removed from his post. A new governor, who did not view the master favorably, was put in his place, and the hostility towards the Baha'is was stirred up. Damaging rumors about Abdu'l-Bahá were spread, and Mirza Muhammad Ali and his accomplices drew up an official indictment against Abdu'l-Bahá. They bribed people to get the required signatures, saying he was inciting rebellion in Palestine and even amongst the Bedouin peoples, and that he had accumulated great wealth It also stated that whereas Baha'u'llah was no more than a holy man, Abdu'l-Bahá claimed for himself the station of prophethood. So they just expanded on these calumnies against him. These charges alarmed the Ottoman authorities. They dispatched a commission of inquiry, and they sent spies to watch over every movement, and all of his friends and advisors stopped visiting. With all of this going on, obviously Abdu'l-Bahá was concerned about the safety of the believers in Akka. During this time, he went so far as to discontinue pilgrimages for a time, and he had all the Baha'i writings and possessions relating to the faith removed by the secretaries and so on. And he directed all of his mail to Egypt so that it could not be intercepted by these covenant breakers. As his daughter Ruhil al-Kanem related to Loa Getzinger in a letter written at this time, it is more than 3 months that our Lord is in great trouble from the government. He is again confined in the city of Akka. One day they say they are going to exile him to Sudan. The other day they say something else. Nobody knows what they are going to do. One of the natives who was a believer is put in prison and is severely punished for leaving his own religion and becoming a Baha'i. Oh dear Lua, it is so difficult for us to see our Lord in such trouble. He never had such a difficult time in Akka before. Even the people of Akka who were friends to him now getting great enemies. Everyone is trying to hurt him, and those few who remain friends, the governor sent them away from Akka. My mother is still not well. She has to be all the time out of Akka because the climate is not good for her. And that is not possible for her, therefore she is ill all the time. So it's a very difficult time. Another of the master's daughter also wrote that for 3 entire months nobody came to see them, and nobody spoke to them on the street for fear of being arrested. But Abdu'l-Bahá continued his work, building the shrine of the Bab and corresponding with the Baha'i world, and helping with the needy and poor of the city. He was summoned to appear before the commission. He did this several times. Each time he demonstrated to them the charges were preposterous fabrications, disposing of each of the allegations with such eloquence and dignity that it became very evident that this was all trumped up charges. The commission then inquired why Americans came to Akka. Hassan Belusi gives a stirring account. Abdu'l-Bahá replied that they came to visit the shrine of Baha'u'llah and to learn of spiritual matters. The commission then asked what Abdu'l-Bahá had to say to the charge that he had distributed seditious literature seen to be in his possession. Such material, he answered, had not been in his possession, and no one could have seen it. The commission had cajoled, bribed, or forced a number of people to come and give evidence to the contrary. Now these witnesses were mentioned. At that, Abdu'l-Bahá rose up, majestic and commanding, declared emphatically that no seditious material could ever have been in his possession, and walked out of the room unhindered. Thereafter, the whole inquiry collapsed. And that's just a generic council chamber. It just represents a place where this may have happened.
During these troubled times, Laura Clifford Barney, an American Baha'i, began to set down Abdu'l-Bahā's responses to her questions. This was between 1904 and 1906 that she sat with Abdu'l-Bahá and interviewed him privately. She wrote down and compiled those notes and his responses, and it became this volume, Some Answered Questions. It had Christian subjects like what is the Pentecost, what is meant by the return, as well as other topics like the nature of the soul or the nature of the manifestation of God. In her introduction to this volume, she writes, I have given to you my tired moments were the words of Abdu'l-Bahá as he rose from the table after answering one of my questions. As it was on this day, so it continued. Between the hours of work, his fatigue would find relief in renewed activity. Occasionally, he was able to speak at length, but often, even though the subject might require more time, he would be called away after a few moments. Again, days and even weeks would pass in which he had no opportunity of instructing me, but I could well be patient, for I had always before me the great lesson, the lesson of his personal life. Ali Quli Khan came to Akka on pilgrimage with his American wife and infant son. They were on their way to Persia, actually, where Khan hoped to find employment in the changing conditions of his country. Their daughter, Marzia Gale, published an account of their pilgrimage in Summon Up Remembrance. Marzia's mother, Boston-born Florence Breed, marveled at Abdu'l-Bahá's dazzling, fresh and crisp appearance, even when he had been out in the town since early morning, visiting the sick and others in need. There is ever, Florence wrote, his own spiritual radiance and fragrance coming from him, which one perceives spiritually and which uplifts one's inner being into a heavenly atmosphere of harmony, delight, and content. His face is astounding, selfless, the stamp of suffering upon it. Here are Ali Quli Khan and Florence Breed with Abdu'l-Bahá. Entries in Florence's journal reveal the stress of those days. One time, in one of the little vaulted hallways, Florence met the master's wife and saw that she was pale and ill. Now she wept and said, "Yes, they send us here to perish like the flame in the lamp. Our lives go down, down, and all is over." That evening, the master arranged for his wife to visit a relative in Tiberias for a change and rest. His wife, Munira Khanum, is on the right. In the spring of 1907, Corinne True visited Abdu'l-Bahá as a pilgrim. Writing of her first meeting with him in the Holy Land, she related, "I really was not prepared for such a manifestation of power. I expected the love, but pictured Abdu'l-Bahá as the Christian does, the meek, humble Nazarene. I found him to be a powerful dynamo, a lion, as well as the most majestic personage I ever hoped to see."
The voice of Corinne True being interviewed by Bill Sears.
I went to Haifa in 1907, and it was in the early spring of 1907. And I sailed from Boston. And I was secretary of a little committee working for the temple here in Chicago, you know. It was in the early days.
As you may know, Corinne True had received instructions from Abdu'l-Bahá for establishing the House of Worship in Wilmette, Illinois, and finding the ground and raising funding for it. And what happened was that the men who were in charge or used to being in charge came to Abdu'l-Bahá for instructions and were told to go and seek Corinne True, and she will give them the instructions. In April 1907, Thornton Chase, the first American believer pictured on the right, reached Akka as a pilgrim. He had left us a vivid picture of his first meeting with Abdu'l-Bahá. Someone said, "The master," and he came into the room with a free, striding step, welcomed us in a clear, ringing voice, and embraced us with kisses as would a father his son, or as would brothers after a long absence. It is no wonder that some have thought that the master loved them more than all others, because he hesitates not to express his love, and he truly loves all humanity in each one. He bade us be seated on the little divan, and he sat on the high, narrow bed at one side of the room, drew up one foot under him, asked after our health, our trip, bade us be happy, and expressed his happiness that we had safely arrived. Then, after a few minutes, he again grasped our hands and abruptly left us. Our hearts were full of joyful tears because we were at home. His welcoming spirit banished strangeness, as though we had always known him. It was as if after long journeyings, weariness, trials, and searchings, we had at last reached home.
have breathed within me a breath of my own spirit, that thou mayest be my lover. Why hast thou forsaken me and sought a beloved other than me? Other than me. I have breathed within thee a breath of my own spirit, that thou mayest be my lover. Why hast thou forsaken me and sought a beloved other than me? Other than me. Why hast thou forsaken me and sought a beloved other than me? Other than me.
There is now a second commission that Mirza Muhammad Ali's actions bring about. It's amazing. We just heard about how pilgrims were able to meet with Abdu'l-Bahá in Akka, and while he was conveying such love and everything to them, he was under huge amounts of stress in this time as well. Pressure from the reformists in Persia were forcing the rulers of Persia to promise to have a constitution, and covenant breakers had decided to seize upon this opportunity. If Persia could have a constitution, then so could the Ottoman Empire, and he felt threatened by this. The covenant breakers then rephrased the charges and forwarded them once again to Constantinople. In the winter of 1907, Abdu'l-Bahá told the Bahá'ís of a dream he had just dreamed. He saw a sailing ship in the Bay of Haifa, birds resembling sticks of dynamite. In this dream, Abdu'l-Bahá stood among them without fear, simply watching the birds which circled again and again before flying back to the ship from which they had come. Danger, Abdu'l-Bahá said, was imminent, but it would pass. A few days later, a new commission of inquiry arrived directly from Constantinople and made their plans to consort with Mirza Muhammad Ali and his supporters. They established a direct link with the ministers in Constantinople. They set spies once again to watch Abdu'l-Bahā's house. They watched the mail and telegrams going into the city. And they put pressure for the local people to testify against Abdu'l-Bahá. And when one refused to do so, they threw him in jail. Once again, Abdu'l-Bahá friends dared not visit him. Even the poor were afraid to come near. The town was rife with rumor. It was certain they would very soon be exiled and would never return. All the prominent men in Akka paid courtesy calls on the members of the commission. Many of his admirers urged him to visit, but Abdu'l-Bahá would not do so. The members, they knew, were angry that Abdu'l-Bahá had not gone to them, but he refused to do. He had nothing to answer for, he said, and nothing to ask for. If he went before them and they acquitted him, it would look like he had curried favor and perhaps even bribed them. During this period, Adib Tahirzadeh relates, the master remained unperturbed and confident. He continued to write his tablets to the Bahá'ís of the East and West, spent some time in planting a few trees in his small garden, and to the astonishment of some notables of Akka, who considered his banishment to be imminent, was seen attending to repairs of his rented house. He even bought fuel for the winter. Khalid Pasha, the governor, furious that his authority had been bypassed by the commission, now ordered Abdu'l-Bahá to be put to trial. The movements of the Bahá'ís were once again restricted, some were molested, and visiting merchants from Egypt were not allowed, Baha'i merchants were not allowed to leave Akka. The Spanish consul offered Abdu'l-Bahá a safe passage anywhere. That's just a generic ship. That's not the ship that was waiting for him. He delayed the ship's departure in the harbor and waited for an answer. After Abdu'l-Bahá consulted a number of believers, he said no, he would not leave. He said the Bab did not run away, nor would he. The members of the commission were now receiving frequent cables from Sultan Abdul Hamid. They were very much occupied in taking down evidence gleaned from the same people who had signed the indictment against Abdu'l-Bahá. It was at some point during these perilous times that Abdu'l-Bahá wrote his will and testament, in which he appointed Shali Effendi, his eldest grandson, and only 10 years old, as his successor, and gave him title of guardian of the cause of God. The will and testament was then buried, so great was the peril in which Abdu'l-Bahá then stood. One paragraph begins, "O dearly beloved friends, I am now in very great danger, and the hope of even an hour's life is lost to me. I am thus constrained to write these lines for the protection of the cause, the preservation of his law, the safeguarding of his word, and the safety of his teachings." In one of the prayers found in the will and testament, the agony of those days is vividly expressed. "Lord, my cup of woe runneth over, and from all sides blows are fiercely raging upon me. The darts of affliction have compassed me round, and the hours of distress have rained upon me. Thus tribulation overwhelmed me, and my strength, because of the onslaught of the foeman, became weakness within me, while I stood alone and forsaken in the midst of my woes. Lord, have mercy upon me. Lift me up unto thyself. Make me drink from the chalice of martyrdom, for the wide world with all its vastness can no longer contain me." This is obviously the time of great stress for Abdu'l-Bahá. And not only was the commission conspiring, but his half-brothers were conspiring to kill him. They stated that he had claimed the station of prophethood, and they inferred that it would be a worthy deed to end his life, and they used this verse from Baha'u'llah as justification. "Whoso layeth a claim to a revelation direct from God ere the expiration of a full 1,000 years, such a man is assuredly a lying impostor. If, however, he persisteth in his error, God will assuredly send down one who will deal mercilessly with him. Terrible indeed is God in punishing." On all sides, Abdu'l-Bahá is feeling this tremendous pressure. Adib Tahirzadeh relates, in one of his talks, the master is reported to have said that God always assisted the covenant breakers during his ministry and enabled them to make every possible breach in the stronghold of the cause, so that the master might stop them all and thus ensure that others in the future would be unable to do likewise. It is in this same period that Abdu'l-Bahá sent a tablet to the cousin of the Bab who had raised the house of worship in Ashgabat. In this tablet, he intimates the great danger which surrounded his person and urges him to make arrangements, when and if it becomes necessary, for the election of the Universal House of Justice. To bring this about, he directs him to gather the Afnan and the hands of the cause in one place, and establish this institution in accordance with the provisions of his will and testament. The picture is the current seat of the House of Justice, which of course was elected in 1963. The members of the commission were hard at work. One day they came and inspected the building work of Mount Carmel. This structure was at one time said to be a fortress that was going to be used to attack the city. And after this visit, Balizi relates, they boarded the boat which had brought them from Constantinople that was now anchored off Haifa. The sun was setting. The boat turned towards Akka. They watched its course. The family of Abdu'l-Bahá and other Baha'is were in despair. But Abdu'l-Bahá, calm and serene, was walking all alone in the courtyard. Anxious Baha'is were watching the movement of the boat of ill omen. The sun sank and the boat kept its course. It came very close to Akka, but then all of a sudden changed direction and made for the open sea. When the news was brought to him, dusk had fallen, and he was still walking in his courtyard with radiant acquiescence. His dream is fulfilled. Events in Constantinople changed the focus of the Sultan. An attempt on his life, though unsuccessful, brought about great change in his rule. As the weeks and months went by, Sultan Abdul Hamid became ever more preoccupied by the threat of revolution, but could not stem the rapidly rising tide. In July 1908, following revolts in Monastir and Salonika, the Young Turks of the Committee of Union and Progress demanded the Sultan restore the constitution he had suspended 30 years earlier. The very next day, the Sultan complied. At a stroke, all the political and religious prisoners in his empire were set free. This naturally included Abdu'l-Bahá. But in Akka, so intense was the opposition aroused by the covenant breakers that the city officials sent a cable to Constantinople inquiring whether this applied to Abdu'l-Bahá also. The answer was affirmative. The long imprisonment was at an end. Abdu'l-Bahá had entered the prison city at 24 years of age. He was now 64 years of age and set free. And I don't know how well you can see it, but that's a chain that becomes birds flying freely up into the sky.
Abdu'l-Bahá has so longed for the freedom to visit his father's shrine at Baji. Now he was able to visit Baji again. He resumed the work of tending to the flower bed he had planted there, close to the shrine. Every Friday and Sunday, he would carry water for the plants, even when local officials and dignitaries accompanied him, sometimes making as many as 60 trips from the nearest water tap to the garden. His physical frame was weak. The stresses of the last decade had affected his health, made him prey to a number of illnesses, but this task of watering the garden was precious to him, bringing him joy and peace of heart. Free at last, he was able to fulfill the task which Baha'u'llah had given him for laying to rest on Mount Carmel the earthly remains of the Bab. As Hassan Baluzi related, on the morning of March 21st, 1909, the day of Nowruz, Abdu'l-Bahá had the marble sarcophagus gift of the Bahá'ís of Rangoon, and you can see the picture of the crate that brought the marble sarcophagus on the right, carried up the mountain and placed in the vault. That evening, he laid in the sarcophagus the wooden casket which contained the inseparable remains of the Bab and the disciple who had died with him. A solitary lamp lit the scene, so poignant and yet so exultant. The Bab had been cruelly maligned, cruelly wronged, cruelly put to death, His torn and smashed body had had no home for many long years. Now the heart of Carmel was receiving it forevermore. With Abdu'l-Bahá on that same evening in the vault of the shrine, which he had so hardly reared, were Bahá'ís of the East and of the West. They were veterans of the faith who had passed through its darkest days. Shoghi Effendi, who was 12 years old at the time, had written of the events of that evening. When all was finished and the earthly remains of the martyr prophet of Shiraz were at long last safely deposited for their everlasting rest in the bosom of God's holy mountain, Abdu'l-Bahá, who had cast aside his turban, removed his shoes, and torn off his cloak, bent low over the still open sarcophagus, his silver hair waving above his head and his face transfigured and luminous, rested his forehead on the border of the wooden casket, and sobbed aloud, wept with such weeping that all those who were present wept with him. That night he could not sleep, so overwhelmed was he with emotion. To the Baha'i of the world, he wrote, the most joyful tiding is this, that the holy and luminous body of the Bab, after having for 60 years been transferred from place to place by reason of ascendancy of the enemy, and from fear of malevolence, and having known neither rest nor tranquility, has, through the mercy of the Abha beauty, been ceremoniously deposited on the day of Nowruz within the sacred casket in the exalted shrine on Mount Carmel. By strange coincidence, on that same day of Nowruz, a cablegram was received from Chicago announcing that the believers in each of the American centers had elected a delegate and sent to that city, and definitely decided on the site and construction of the house of worship. A Baha'i of Ishkabab, Aka Mizra Jafar-i Hadiof, now offered to pay for the construction of a pilgrim house close to the shrine. It was soon built. This house today welcomes pilgrims from all over the world to the shrine of the Bab. After the entombment of the remaining of the Bab, Abdu'l-Bahá moved from Akko to Haifa, where a house was built for him. Here, the climate was far more healthy than Akko, but Abdu'l-Bahá suffered periodic bout of illness, sometimes severe. He kept the knowledge of these illnesses from the Baha'is, but his physician urged him to travel to different climate.
In mid-August 1910, Abdu'l-Bahá went to Egypt. Isabella Brittingham, an American Baha'i, received a letter from Sidney Sprague about this. I have a very big piece of news to tell you. Abdu'l-Bahá has left this holy spot for the first time in 42 years and has gone to Egypt. Everyone was astounded to hear of Abdu'l-Bahá's departure, for no one knew until the very last minute that he had any idea of leaving. The afternoon of the day he left, he came to Mirza Asadullah Holmes to see us and sat with us beside a new well that has just been finished and said that he had come to taste the water. We did not realize that it was a goodbye visit. Then he took a carriage and went up the hill to the holy tomb of the Bab. That night, as usual, the believers gathered before the house of Abdu'l-Bahá to receive that blessing, which every day is ours, of being in his presence. But we waited in vain. for one of the son-in-law came and told us that Abdu'l-Bahá had taken the Khadiva steamer to Port Said. Abdu'l-Bahá stayed in Port Said for several weeks. Baha'is from Cairo visited him there. Said Asdullah Qumi, a Baha'i who was to act as Abdu'l-Bahā's attendant during the forthcoming travels, relates, one day he called me to accompany him when taking a walk in the street of the city. He said, "Do you realize now the meaning of my statement when I was telling the friends that there was a wisdom in my indisposition?" I answered, "Yes, I do remember very well." He continued, "Well, the wisdom was that I must always move according to the requirements of the cause. Whatever the cause requires for its progress, I will not delay in its accomplishment for one moment. Now, the cause did require that I travel to these parts, and had I divulged my intention at that time, many difficulties would have arisen." After a month at Port Said, Abdu'l-Bahá boarded a ship sailing to Europe, but was obliged to disembark at Alexandria, as it very quickly became evident that his health was not yet good enough for such a journey. Here in Alexandria, a remarkable and sudden change occurred. Egyptian and Persian journalists who had been openly hostile to Abdu'l-Bahá on his arrival in Egypt now began to seek interviews with him and wrote articles in which they expressed their genuine admiration and respect. The Persian community of Alexandria actually invited Abdu'l-Bahá to attend their commemoration of the martyrdom of the Imam Hussein during the month of Muharram. Hassan Bal-Yuzi relates, he went and was received with every mark of respect. He gave a robe to the reciter of the heart-rending story of Karbala, rewarding him richly for his talent and devotion. He also left money with the hosts to hold a commemorative meeting on his behalf and to feed the poor. In November 1910, Wesley Tupperport, an English admirer, visited Abdu'l-Bahá at Ramleh near Alexandria and wrote the following to the friends in England. Abdu'l-Bahā's health had greatly improved since his arrival from Port Said. He was looking strong and vigorous in every way. He spoke much of the work in America, to which he undoubtedly is giving considerable thought. He also spoke a good deal about the work that is going forward in different European centers as well as in London, and he expects great things from England during the coming year. That is the city of Ramleh. Abdu'l-Bahá was hoping to leave for Europe in the early summer of 1911, but in May, he moved to a small town near Cairo. Here, once again, the journalists of the country paid him attention and accorded him considerable respect. Here, the Mufti of Egypt and the Khadiv's principal religious advisor both called on Abdu'l-Bahá. He returned their calls. Then the Khadiv himself met twice with Abdu'l-Bahá and treated him with particular reverence. Lord Kitchener met with him and was deeply impressed by his personality. Hassan Bal-Yuzi summarized the last months of the year that Abdu'l-Bahá spent in Egypt. Indeed, there were many clerks, aristocrats, administrators, parliamentarians, men of letters, journalists, and publicists, Arabs, Turks, and Persians, who sought his presence. The poor and the deprived also had access to him and went away happy. His personal triumph resulting in Egypt, Abdu'l-Bahá turned his attention to Europe. On August 11, 1911, he boarded SS Corsica bound for Marseille.
Tearfully, I raised my hands and supplicate unto thee in prayer. Close my eyes and you're there again. It's not the end. You are with me always. Abdu'l-Bahá. Your footsteps are oh so hard to follow. For a broken wing bird whose flight is very slow, such a long, long way to go. Hopefully, I turn my face to thee and ask forgiveness. All my life I've been blind, now I see. Mankind is one, all religions agree. Abdu'l-Bahá. The lessons of your life are here to follow. Now this broken wing bird whose flight is very slow has a way to go.
The master reached London on September 4th, 1911. Hippolyte and Laura Clifford Dreyfus Barney had come from Paris to assist with translation from Persian to English. Lady Blomefield had prepared for the master her home at 97 Cadogan Gardens in the hope that he might deign to sojourn there a while. Abdu'l-Bahá's first words in that house were, "I'm very much pleased with you all. Your love has drawn me to London. I waited 40 years in prison to bring the message to you. Are you pleased to receive such a guest?" It was the custom at that time in homes such as Lady Blomefield's to serve a large number of courses at dinner, particularly when guests were present. After his first dinner there, Abdu'l-Bahá said, "The food was delicious and the fruit and flowers were lovely. But would that we could share some of the courses with those poor and hungry people who have not even one." At once it was agreed by all present that one substantial, plentiful dish with salad, cheese, biscuits, sweetmeats, fruits, and flowers on the table, preceded by soup and followed by coffee or tea, should be quite sufficient for any dinner. This arrangement would greatly simplify life, both as to cookery and service, and would undeniably be more in accordance with the ideals of Christianity than numerous dishes, unnecessary and costly. Abdu'l-Bahá had come to London with a secretary, Mirza Mahmud, and one servant named Khusra. Lady Bloomfield describes his daily routine. He rose very early, chanted prayers, took tea, wrote tablets, and dictated others. He then received those who flocked to see him, some arriving soon after dawn, patiently waiting on the doorsteps until the door would be opened for their entrance. Oh, these pilgrims, these guests, these visitors. Remembering those days, our ears are filled with the sound of their footsteps as they came from every country in the world, every day, all day long, in a constant stream. Ministers and missionaries, Oriental scholars and occult students, practical men of affairs and mystics, Anglican Catholics and nonconformists, Theosophists and Hindus, Christian scientists and doctors of medicine, Muslims, Buddhists, and Zoroastrians. They're also called politicians, Salvation Army soldiers, and other workers for human good, woman suffragists, journalists, writers, poets, and healers, dressmakers and great ladies, artists and artisans, poor workless people and prosperous merchants, members of the dramatic and musical world. These all came, and none were too lowly nor too great to receive the sympathetic consideration of this holy messenger. The Reverend R.J. Campbell, a liberal-minded minister, invited Abdu'l-Bahá to address his congregation at the City Temple Church in central London. Abdu'l-Bahá had never given a public address anywhere. He opened with these words: "O noble friends, seekers after God, praise be to God. Today the light of truth is shining upon the world in its abundance. The breezes of the heavenly garden are blowing throughout all regions. The call of the kingdom is heard in all lands, and the breath of the Holy Spirit is felt in all hearts that are faithful. The Spirit of God is giving eternal life. In this wonderful age, the East is enlightened, the West is fragrant, and everywhere the soul inhales the holy perfume." In his brief address, Abdu'l-Bahá brilliantly summarized the heart of the Baha'i message in words of joyous exultation. The Lord Mayor of London invited Abdu'l-Bahá to call on him at the Mansion House, which he did. He visited a settlement of working women in Byfleet, a village in Surrey. He spent a weekend in Bristol, staying at the Clifton Guest House. There, a reception was held for him. Around 90 prominent citizens of Bristol attended and heard him speak. He visited the home of Mr. and Mrs. Jenner near Richmond Park and delighted in the greenness he saw there. On September 29th, he spoke to a gathering of 460 people invited by Lady Bloomfield to bid him farewell in the hall of Passmore Edwards Settlement in Tavistock Place. Abdu'l-Bahá's departure was arranged for the morning of October 3rd. Lady Bloomfield relates of that morning. Abdu'l-Bahá sat calmly writing. We reminded him that the hour to leave for the train was at hand. He looked up saying, "There are things of more importance than trains," and he continued to write. Suddenly, in breathless haste, a man came in, carrying in his hand a beautiful garland of fragrant white flowers. Bowing low before the master, he said, "In the name of the disciples of Zoroaster, the Pure One, I hail thee as the promised Shah Bahram." Then the man, for a sign, garlanded Abdu'l-Bahá and proceeded to anoint each and all of the amazed friends who were present with precious oil, which had the odor of fresh roses. The brief but impressive ceremony concluded, Abdu'l-Bahá, having carefully divested himself of the garland, departed for the train.
Abdu'l-Bahá reached Paris on October the 3rd. Hippolyte and Laura Dreyfus Barney had found for him a spacious, sunny apartment at 4 Avenue des Comètes. From this avenue, a flight of steps led to the Trocadero Gardens. And in those gardens, Lady Bloomfield relates, the master often took solitary, restful walks. Sheltered in this modern, comfortable Paris flat, he whom we revered with the secretary, servitors, and a few close friends sojourned for an unforgettable 9 weeks. The map on the right shows the location of the apartment. It shows the Trocadero Gardens next to the Seine River, across which is the Eiffel Tower. Every morning, Abdu'l-Bahá spoke to those who sought his presence. He spoke in Persian, and his words were translated into French by Hippolyte and Laura Dreyfus Barney. Lady Blomfield, with her 2 daughters and Miss Beatrice Marion Platt, had traveled from London to Paris and stayed there throughout his visit. Together, they took down the addresses that he gave in Paris. The master requested them to prepare an English version of these talks for publication. Their compilation, Paris Talks, published in London in 1912. The words of Abdu'l-Bahá can be put on paper, Lady Blomfield said, but how to describe the smile, the earnest pleading, the loving kindness, the radiant vitality, and at times the awe-inspiring authority of his spoken words? The vibrations of his voice seem to enfold the listeners in an atmosphere of the spirit and to penetrate to the very core of being. This portrait was taken in Paris on that trip. The groups of people to whom Abdu'l-Bahá spoke were more varied than those he had addressed in London. Paris was at that time a very cosmopolitan city, a mecca for artists and a center for intellectual thought. In addition, there were many who had fled their own lands for various reasons and were living in exile in Paris, amongst them a number of Persians, formerly prominent in their homeland. Lady Blomfield describes those who came to see Abdu'l-Bahá as being of all nationalities and creeds, from the East, from the West, including theosophists, agnostics, materialists, spiritualists, Christian scientists, social reformers, Hindus, Sufis, Muslims, Buddhists, Zoroastrians, and many others. Often came workers in various humanitarian societies who were striving to reduce the miseries of the poor. There's a little newspaper article at the bottom which lists who came to one of these meetings and also mentions people by name. Pierre Hyacinth Loyson Predicateur, which is a preacher and a teacher, and Remy D. Guillermon, the writer, and Mr. and Mrs. Mardros, the poets. And so it was a long article. It was in Paris that Abdu'l-Bahá said, when speaking of the relationship between science and religion, there is in existence a stupendous force as yet happily undiscovered by man. Let us supplicate God, the beloved, that this force be not discovered by science until spiritual civilization shall dominate the human mind. In the hands of men of lower material nature, this power would be able to destroy the whole earth. In Paris, as elsewhere, Abdu'l-Bahá counseled those he addressed to have faith and to work for harmony amongst the nations. He said, lift up your hearts above the present and look with eyes of faith into the future. Today the seed is sown, the grain falls upon the earth, but behold, the day will come when it shall rise a glorious tree, and the branches thereof shall be laden with fruit. Rejoice and be glad that this day has dawned. Try to realize its power, for it is indeed wonderful. Some of those international organizations, the League of Nations 19 and 19, this is all in the future because Abdu'l-Bahá was there in 1911, the formation of the United Nations in 1945, but at the bottom there are these organizations that are now part of the United Nations, but were separate in the beginning, that predate. You see the International Telecommunications Union, formed 1865. This was originally the International Telegraph Union, 1865. World Meteorological Organization, 1873. Universal Postal Union, exchange of letters and packages, 1874. World Health Organization, 1948, after the formation of the United Nations. International organizations that today we take for granted, really, that had not come into being at that time. One day, Lady Blomfield received a letter threatening harm to Abdu'l-Bahá if he visited a certain country for which I, the writer, understand he proposes to set forth in the near future. When Lady Blomfield showed Abdu'l-Bahá this letter and expressed her fears for his safety, He smiled at her and replied, "My daughter, have you not yet realized that never in my life have I been for one day out of danger, and that I should rejoice to leave this world and go to my Father?" He then comforted her, assuring her and the other friends that such enemies had no power over his life, but only that which was given them by God. A number of church leaders came to meet with Abdu'l-Bahá, some earnestly inquiring, others with minds already closed. One afternoon, Lady Blomfield relates, a party of the latter type arrived. They spoke words of bigotry, of intolerance, of sheer cruelty, in their bitter condemnation of all who did not accept their own particular dogma. The heart of Abdu'l-Bahá was saddened by this interview, which had tired him exceedingly. When he referred to this visit, there was a look in his eyes as if loving pity were blended with profound disapproval. Then he uttered these words in a voice of awe-inspiring authority: "Jesus Christ is the Lord of compassion, and these men call themselves by his name. Jesus is ashamed of them." He shivered as if with cold, drawing his abba about him with a gesture as if sternly repudiating their misguided outlook. At his last meeting held on December 1st, Abdu'l-Bahá said, "The only real difference that exists between people is that they are at various stages of development, but one and all are the children of God. Love them all with your whole heart. No one is a stranger to the other. All are friends. I in the East and you in the West. Let us try with heart and soul that unity may dwell in the world, that all the peoples may become one people, and that the whole surface of the earth may be like one country. For the sun of truth shines on all alike." December 2nd, Abdu'l-Bahá left for Egypt.
Y'all are now invited to share stories and quotes. They can be from other years, from other authors, but should help us better understand Abdu'l-Bahá. This is an opportunity to practice telling a story from memory. I've been taking these town halls and translating them into lessons for the children and talking to them about how Abdu'l-Bahá learned things. It has given me even more than the town hall, an even deeper thought into what it was like to be a child with the kind of life that Abdu'l-Bahá had, being the eldest son of a dad who was imprisoned and exiled. The first segment, when Baha'u'llah was taken to the Siyachal, and Abdu'l-Bahá very suddenly left his comfortable life and they moved to a little place in the city, and they didn't have any money, they didn't have anything, and Abdu'l-Bahá was often charged with going out by himself and doing errands, going to borrow money from the uncle or going to get some food or something. And he was about 8 years old at the time. I've heard several versions of these stories of him and the bullies in the street. And apparently this gang of ruffians knew he was a Baha'i and that they could pick on him. So one story is that he ran all the way home. But then a later story is that somehow he confronted these bullies. According to one version of the story, and maybe all the stories are true, but this one, he was pursued by these bullies. He realized that there were more of them and they were going to overtake him. So he turned around and ran straight at them. And he frightened them so much that they all ran away. According to the story, they never bothered him again. There was something very powerful about the way that he ran after them. So I was thinking he was starting to learn from the age of 8 how to be a leader, how to make decisions in difficult times. And then in the next segment, when he was in Baghdad, when Baha'u'llah had gone to the mountains, when Baha'u'llah finally came back, everybody wanted to see him. Suddenly he was famous. Everybody heard about him. When he originally left, there was a lot of confusion over who he was, and there was a lot of trouble from his brother about who he was, and he didn't want to be in the middle of that. When he came back, it was pretty clear that everybody wanted to see Baha'u'llah. And Abdu'l-Bahá stepped in to manage the crowds decisively. The people who weren't sincere told them to go away. And I think at that time he was about 14 years old.
When Abdu'l-Bahá left Haifa, as far as I understand now, Bahia Hanum is in charge. If all his mail was coming to Egypt, then I guess he's receiving his mail and he's responding to his mail. But when he's in Europe, probably that's not happening. And then she is the one that is, I think, responding to emergencies and requests.
Yeah, she was. It wasn't placeholding. Okay, thank you for that information. When my brother gets back, we'll deal with it. No, she had authority. If something needed to be taken care of, she was given the authority to take care of it, which probably ruffled a few feathers, to say the least. And I get the sense that it was a heightening time for the covenant breakers because Abdu'l-Bahá wasn't there. So she had to keep them at bay, as well as keep everything in order as much as she could. I didn't realize how sick Abdu'l-Bahá was and how he always was able to rally when needed. There's a lot of lessons for us in what was shared. For example, he went because that's what was needed for the faith to grow. So I think that's something we need to kind of sort of look at. So what is needed for this faith to grow? What role am I going to play in helping this faith to grow? Because that's what Abdu'l-Bahá did. Standing on his feet was extremely difficult. He had chronic pains in his legs and his feet. And yet he stood there and he shook those hands and he just did what was needed to get done, rising above his physical pain. Well, a lot of us are getting older and physical pain is a real thing, but it doesn't mean we can't be of service. We need to keep looking at, no matter what's in our life, how can we be of service? How can we do what needs to be done?
Usually we don't take the time to go through the details. We hear the most popular stories again and again, but not the less popular or the ones that are dealing with the covenant breakers. We might tend to leave those out. But this, we're trying to get into that, and it explains so many things. It explains how Abdu'l-Bahá developed so many talents and skills because he had to. The complexity of the faith was and continues to expand. I don't know if it's geometrically or exponentially, but it's just astounding. And I can see that just in these town halls, that the first decade of Abdu'l-Bahā's life, we had trouble finding stories. The second decade, there was some stories. The third decade, there was a lot of little stories in the book. She would put them in little paragraphs with a quote. But in what we just presented, there's so much going on that she doesn't do it that way anymore. She can only pick a few stories, and she goes into some detail with those stories, but you just realize that she had to discard almost everything to keep a few of those stories. There's so much.